Welcome to Frickety Frack. We do talk back. Thank you for joining us in our 13th episode.
Hello, my name is Patrick, and I'm Frack.
Hello, my name is Jeff, and I'm Frick. Frickety Frack, We Do Talk Back is a show airing once a week where we'll discuss different aspects of fandom and how they relate to the gospel. And for the first season of the podcast, we will be going through the first season of My Hero Academia and how we see lessons from the episodes that connect to teachings in the Bible. And just as many as you are, we are also fans of other things as well. So when we get through the first season of My Hero Academia, we're going to take a brief break and do something different. And we do have something picked out, but we'll make the announcement in the next episode after we finish the last episode of My Hero Academia's first season. And we got the name for the show from our father, who dubbed us Frick and Frack since we were kids.
So this is the 12th episode of the first season of My Hero Academia, and the title of the episode is All Might. And so in this episode, All Might arrives chastising himself for having to rest, and sees the disarray of his fellow pros and the fear in his students. And so his first priority is to reassure the students that everything's going to be okay. And so All Might makes extremely quick work of the rabble at a breakneck speed before they can even do anything. And during this, he also moves Midoriya, Sue, Aizawa, and Mineta out of harm's way. And Shigaraki is upset by how fast he moved, but he actually does believe that All Might is weaker than he was. And so during all this, Midoriya warns All Might about Nomu's ability to take his own smash and is concerned for All Might. All Might begins his fight with Nomu. And so between Nomu and Kurogiri, All Might is pinned when Midoriya goes to help. But he starts to get in the way, and at that moment, Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki intervene enough to help All Might escape. So during this, Nomu decides to goes after Bakugo, but All Might saves him. As Shigaraki goes to attack the kids, All Might's battle with Nomu keeps Shigaraki and Kurogiri back. All Might goes beyond and defeats Nomu, and declaring that all of this is over.
So with this episode, a lot of, this is very heavily All Might. This is very heavily a fight episode. So with some of the more character-driven episodes, there's not as much necessarily to flesh out. However, there is a lot of interesting stuff happening. So for instance, we do get introduced to one of All Might's signature moves. This is the first time he's ever done Carolina Smash in the anime. So and when we get to the first My Hero Academia movie, we'll actually see a little bit as to why he uses the different states of America for his signature moves. It's more of a cool, quirky little thing than anything. It's not, mind blowing or anything like that. But one of the first things that really stood out to me in this episode was when All Might arrives. Midoriya sees All Might and he instantly thinks All Might is here, but he's not smiling. And I don't know if the rest of the kids recognize that he's not actually smiling, and it might just be more Midoriya because he knows All Might on a much more personal level than the rest of the students. But the fact that All Might is known for, when he's out in the battlefield, to having a constant smile, and the fact that Midoriya recognizes that All Might is here, but he's not smiling. It just kind of shows the gravity of the situation. It's just something, and it's just a really cool line right there, and showing the relationship that Midoriya and All Might has.
Yeah, because he makes this big entrance, and I think one of my favorite things that he does while he's not smiling but has a superhero angry face on, he takes the tie off, and I'm like, oh dang, the tie is coming off. I mean, that's huge. I mean, it flashes me to I like Jackie Chan movies because Jackie Chan always starts his fights in suits, but he'll take his tie off to use as a weapon or thing like that, and so it's getting serious when he starts using his clothing as weapons. And it was like, oh man, he's taking the tie off. He's about to get serious and up in here.
Right. Well, it just, to me, it also kind of harkens to a little bit about with like Superman when he's changing from his Clark Kent reporter outfit and ditching the suit and tie for his superhero outfit. And now, mind you, All Might is not fighting in one of his hero costumes. He is actually in his teacher's suit uniform, suit look, and ditches the jacket and ditches the tie, and which in all honesty it's also a practical thing because if Nomu is as strong as he is, fighting in a tie is practically a noose. So it's part of the reason why cops, the ties that they wear are actually clip-ons, they're not real ties. Or some cops are like that. I don't know if all police officers do that, but
I'm pretty sure that's standard operating procedure for cops when they're forced to wear ties as part of their uniform.
Yeah. But anyways, that was just like a really cool moment, because as we were saying, All Might has this tendency to always be smiling as a means to reassure them. And they're actually during this entire episode, there's actually several great moments between All Might and Midoriya, doing these just the mentor-mentee relationship, not needing to say a lot of words, but able to clearly communicate with one another, so they can understand the gravity of the situation. It's one of the things that, especially like Midoriya's knowledge of the situation with not just with All Might, but with the fight as well, helps All Might win the fight ultimately against Nomu. And so it's just there's just several fault, like especially like to me too, like the thumbs up that All Might gives Midoriya. I just love that.
Yeah, and so something that we have been saying as part of this show has been, go B plus ultra, that kind of thing. And so this is the best go beyond plus ultra that has happened in the show so far. And I have to really, I'll have to, as we go through the show, we'll obviously come across other times when plus ultra is said, but this is probably the best it is in the entire series, because it's not said in battle very often, and so most of the time it's just kind of like a catchphrase, and it's so much better coming from in the heart of battle.
Right. And the one thing is that there are times that they're going to go plus ultra, but they don't say plus ultra. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this is the best in the series where a hero goes plus ultra. I'm thinking of a couple other instances but for the sake of not spoiling anything, I'm not going to talk about them. But up to this point,
it is said a lot in the second movie.
Well, not necessarily just the movie, but I'm just thinking about some of the fights that are coming.
Right.
And so, but you're right. This was a very moving moment, and it also in the fight that All Might has with Nomu, we see the moving star. I guess I don't know how else to kind of describe it. Where in that instance, we'll find out more about this as the series progresses, but this is the bouncing star with the different colors going around. That is actually one for all.
Mm-hmm.
That is the true one for all being activated in those instances. And so we'll get to see. So we get to see more. We're getting these little hints as to how the quirk really operates. And so it's really cool that this happened in this fight. So it is great to see some more of how the quirk actually operates, because there's not a whole lot known. In fact, earlier in the series, Midoriya even mentions that All Might's quirk isn't really known as to what it is. In fact, there's only a handful of people that actually know what All Might's quirk really is.
Right.
And speaking of the combat, uh, the kids of 1A, they still continue to shine. Bakugo and Todoroki in particular really shine shown. I don't know. Really showed their true potential. Bakugo quickly, just like Uraraka did in the previous episode, Bakugo also figured out Kurogiri's weakness, realizing it's like, there's a body in there, and I found it, and actually had him pinned to making him ineffective in the fight. And then Todoroki manages to freeze half of the Nomu to the point where All Might is actually able to escape.
Yeah, and
And
it's one of my favorite parts of this is All Might tells him to go, and Todoroki's like, "Yeah, you needed us just a few moments ago, so we're not going anywhere."
right, yeah, Todoroki is definitely, and again, a part of it is his upbringing, and when we get into more of his upbringing later in the series, um, you know, and then on top of it too, up to this point, he is truly justified in the manner in which he walks because of the control of his power, and not just the control of his power, the level of his power. I don't think they've described any other person's power set as, when they described Todoroki's, when they introduced him as, uh, you know, top power level unknown, like, his power limit, we don't know what his limit is. So he is, out of everybody up to this point, he is truly justified to be out on the battlefield. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and I
and he
love
and yeah, and then on top of it too, he puts All Might in his place. It's like, dude, I'm the one that rescued you. If it wasn't for me, you'd probably be dead.
yeah, I love that. Uh, Todoroki even at a certain point is like, oh, so this is what the number one looks like,
Right.
and so I think that
Yeah.
was an eye opener for him, because he's like, because he wants to surpass All Might, Bakugo wants to surpass All Might, and they're getting a taste of what it actually means to be the number one hero,
Mhm.
and so that's kind of a good thing for them to see. It's humbling, but it's also inspiring and motivating and things like
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And and again, it's just further proof that, they understand how powerful they are. But this is with the exception of Bakugo and Midoriya, this is probably this is for most of the kids, this is their first real experience of seeing All Might in action. Bakugo and Midoriya have both seen him in action already, but this is them seeing him. But this is also the first time Bakugo and Midoriya really see him in action, to the point where he's going even beyond his limits. And All Might makes a point to mention, it's like, I'm not. It's like, oh, you're built to withstand 100% of my power. Well, I'm going to go beyond that then. Um, and so it's just All Might truly does deserve to be the number one hero, with the way that he acts and just his inspiration and just his heroism that he displays. He's earned it, and it's not like there's not a debate. And
it's one of those things that I've been enjoying reading My Hero Academia Vigilantes. Like All Might has popped up a little bit, not a whole lot, because it's because it's not really about him. But I hope we get to see more of him in his prime. Like we've seen it a little bit in the manga, and I really hope we get to see more of it. And I really kind of hope it's like the Fantastic Beasts moment where we in the Harry Potter movie series, the Fantastic Beasts series, we know that eventually it's going to lead to a Dumbledore Grindelwald duel, wizard duel. And I really hope that in Vigilante you get to see the fight between One for All, or sorry, All for One and All Might that led to his injury. Or maybe, probably what they'll do is they'll actually probably do that in the main series, since it'll probably be a part of a story moment or something like that, part of the origin. So that's probably what will happen. But fingers crossed.
right.
That
As
we'll
long as we
eventually
get
see it.
as long as we get it somewhere, that's all that really matters.
That's true.
Because it'll be glorious. It's just, yeah, it's going to be epic. So some of the other moments are that I just really like in this episode as well is Kurogiri in this. They actually, or the League of Villains, when it'd been brought up in the last couple episodes that they actually have a plan in place that would kill All Might. And as we just discover in this fight, not only do they have a plan to kill All Might, it's actually a legitimately good plan. I think you would agree, right, Patrick?
Absolutely.
So what their plan was to kill All Might was the Nomu would get a hold of All Might, because one of the things too that was really on display in this episode with All Might's fighting is his superhuman speed, to the point where several characters comments like, I didn't even see him move. Like I couldn't see him. And so the major point of what Nomu, what his job was, is that he can match power and speed with All Might, but also absorb the shockwaves of All Might's power. So his goal was to capture and pin down All Might, and then Kurogiri was going to create a warp gate that All Might, that the Nomu would push All Might through, and then he would just cut him in half. So it's just kind of like you'd wish that Iron Man would have watched My Hero Academia before they fought Thanos on Titan. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, that's one of those things that if anyone is a fan of how it should have ended, it's a cartoon series and on YouTube, that where they'll point out the flaws in blockbuster movies and some other movies and stuff too. And that was one of them, that was like, Doctor Strange has that warping spell kind of thing, and that can chop things off. And he was like, they should have done that to his arm, to his head, whatever, or heck, even use the time stone to turn Thanos into a baby. And so, but
yeah. And here's the thing too with the Infinity War fight is that let's just say, for instance, especially with Doctor Strange, he comes from the medical profession, and the people of the medical profession, take it very seriously that their goal in life is to do no harm. It's like, okay, so I could totally understand him being like, no, I am not going to create a little teleporty thing and chop off his head. Not going to do it. However, I can chop off his arm that has the gauntlet, so it's just kind of like, just easy peasy, lemon squeezy, just knock it right off. And it's not like, and the other thing is too, earlier in the movie, they showed that happening to one of the children of Thanos, you
Yeah.
know. So, anyways, we're getting off topic. But yeah, so
we're,
it's just
we're passionate about these superhero stuff. I don't know
right.
if you
And
guys
so
can tell that.
the other Kuragiri moment that I just actually really liked, that this is more comedic than well, I don't know about comedic, but just kind of made me laugh a little bit, is Kuragiri even makes a comment. It's like, I really don't want blood and guts, getting all caught up in my warp gates, but I'm willing to make an exception for All Might. And, so to me, that's just kind of funny that, it's like, you don't think about this you wouldn't think about this with somebody that creates, portals or anything like that. It's like, well, what happens if they get stuck in there? And it's just like, and since most of Kuragiri's body is all of this warp smoke stuff, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'm going to have All Might floating around in me. So it's just, and again, it just continues to show the immense practicality of the series. Even though this world is a world full of people with superpowers, there's still some practicality to it. Like, it's real. It's realistic to an extent.
Yeah, and they do a lot of discussing a little bit about uh, the nature of people's quirks and things like that. And one of the things that My Hero Academia does more, and we've talked about this in several episodes, and especially earlier on, about the limitations of quirks and things like that, because you read comic books or superhero movies, and for a lot of them, there's not a whole lot of um, limits to people's powers. Like, there's strength limits and things like that, but they don't say like, oh, I can only do, so much sticking to walls. Take an example of Spider-Man, or because after that, my fingers dry out because it makes my skin dry out by sticking to walls, something like that. Or Superman can only fly so much before he runs out of steam. Like, he can only fly as long as he can hold his breath, something like that. Like, there's no limits like that to the superheroes of comics, where My Hero Academia did that and thought a lot of this through, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, and they put natural limitations on the powers, and so it's not like it's something random where it's like, my power only works if I can wiggle my pinky toe or something like that. No, it's just like, we'll get into this with Todoroki a little bit later on. Like, for instance, if he uses his eyesight too much, his body literally starts to freeze. So it's this. Again, it's one of the reasons why I love My Hero Academia so much, is that it's so, it's realistic. It's like, and they don't have to come up with some ridiculous notion. Like, for instance, Kryptonite with it's like Kryptonite with Superman, that took years for Kryptonite to actually show up, and was actually created for the radio serial that they were doing. So the guy that voiced Superman in the radio program needed a vacation, so they came up with Kryptonite, which is radioactive pieces of Krypton, causing him to be sick. And so it's like, all right, go take your vacation. And then, like, the other another absolute ridiculous weakness for heroes, which they've pretty much gotten rid of this particular one, but the members of the Green Lantern Corps, they're weak against the color yellow.
Yeah. And then Alan
Just
Scott was weak against wood.
right. And it's just absolutely, to make them relatable, they put these limitations on them, but the limitations are, honestly kind of ridiculous. And they later come up with some actually very interesting reasons as to why those limitations are in place. Maybe we'll cover those later because those are some part of my favorite comic book runs ever. Um, but yeah, anyways, it's just the My Hero Academia just has this really great. It's a really well thought out world that's just truly enjoyable, and hopefully you that are listening, if you haven't gotten into My Hero Academia yet, you are now because of our show, um, and understanding of just like how great the show is and just how well thought out it is, um, and it truly is one of the best animes I've ever watched.
Mhm. Yeah, and so hopefully with going through My Hero Academia, you're also learning stuff about the Bible and how to connect the things that you're fans with to your beliefs as Christians, and all those things. And so we'll get into the biblical theme that we have for this episode. And oddly enough, it is inspired by the villain of the show. And so the scripture that I found was Matthew 26, verse 52. And this is what it says, and this is Jesus talking. Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. And so this is happening as Jesus is being arrested, and uh, Peter has drawn his sword, and the other disciples are taking their swords out, and Peter has sliced the ear off of a guard, and Jesus is like, no, this is not what you should be doing. And so Shigaraki talks about and chastises All Might for propping up a hero society that is like, oh well, as long as it's the heroes doing the violence, then it's okay violence. But if it's something that villains do, then we're considered evil because we're not heroes. And so he even explains, he's like, Midoriya, he's like, this guy tried to do a full-on super-powered punch that if Nomu hadn't gotten in the way, probably would have killed me. And just Shigaraki thinks about
It would
this.
have popped him like a zit.
Exactly. He should have been grateful that Nomu took that, because then there wouldn't be that much of a show. It would end probably here. But anyways, and so he talks about this violence, that violence begets more violence. And now All Might calls him on it. I was like, no, you're trying to make your actions more noble than they actually are. You actually like this, don't you? And Shigaraki, in his mind, he doesn't say this out loud. I was like, oh man, he's gotten it figured out. So he already admits that his philosophy that he was spouting was a load of garbage. And All Might called him on it, but he wasn't going to give in to him. He just was like, well, All Might's smarter than he looks. And so this is one of those things that really kind of makes me think about in comic books and superhero movies. And there's two superhero movies that really kind of talk about this a little bit. It's called Batman Begins gives it a name. It's called Escalation. And at the end of Batman Begins, Gordon is talking with Batman and tells him, was like, when we started carrying, semi-automatics, the criminals got automatics. They started wearing Kevlar, and so then they started shooting with armor-piercing rounds. And so then now they've got a crime fighter out there who dresses up as a bat, and now we've got this. And he holds up a Joker card and saying that there's a guy who's dressing up and is a little bit theatrical, and says like, and so this is what is coming of Batman dressing up as Batman.
Yeah. Gordon shows a genuine concern as to what is going to happen because of Batman's presence. It's like, who knows what you're going to unleash just by being you.
Yeah, and then Captain America: Civil War touches on it a little bit. Vision points out that the number of superhuman, or I think they refer to them as enhanced incidents, are on the rise since the birth of the Avengers in the
Well,
Marvel
well, it
universe.
actually, well, he in Civil War, he actually talks about since Tony came out as Iron Man. That's actually the
Oh,
timeline that he points out.
that's right.
Uh,
I forgot about that part.
yeah, the number of, I think I think the wording Vision uses is cataclysmic events. I think is the terminology he uses. I could be wrong about that. Um, but along those lines, that's what he means is that it's, um, ever since Tony came out and announced that he's Iron Man, the these moments where the world or people are in great peril are not only becoming more frequent, they're actually growing in, um, the
Scope.
level of disaster. Like the scope is getting worse.
Yeah. And so for me, this is, and the comics have discussed this, and have shown how, people have had to up their games. Like, of course, then we go to the 90s in comic books where everything goes extreme, and uh, and and then one of my favorites is that every hero starts wearing armor, like Captain America wore armor, Daredevil wore armor, Batman wore armor, but that wasn't actual Batman. That was the Jean Paul Valley, who was Batman, and who was Looney Tunes. Um, but that was a interesting design, to say the least.
Yeah.
And so they've always had this thought in the back of the mind, and Batman does it the most, because he's like, am I this? Because it gets thrown in his face a lot of like, you are causing just as much of a problem as these villains are, because they wouldn't be here without you. And because he's drawn out all these psychopaths have come out of the woodworks. Joker, Riddler, Two Face, any number of wonderful villains in the Batman rogues gallery. Um, and so you don't really know. I mean, obviously, they couldn't just fight regular criminals, because that would eventually get boring. So they have to do supervillains or crazy serial killers like the Joker, or things like that, because it's just, you got to do things a little bit differently, got to be more flashy, things like that, just to sell comic books. But it's one of those things that it's a legitimate thing to be concerned about, and especially in this superhuman society where 80% of the population has some kind of superpower. And I mean, this was gonna happen. And so, as one of the things that we'll discuss in the series as it goes along, will be, what does a superhuman society look like, and what kind of um, pressure are these heroes in, what kind of pressure are the citizens going through, and what kind of pressure are the villains going through. And it's really going to point to all of this, and it's an amazing journey. And if you are reading the manga, and if you're up to date, oh my gosh, we've got some great stuff coming up in the anime, and I cannot wait to see it done.
But when we look at the important lesson here, that what Jesus is trying to teach us is that when you resort to violence, what you're going to get back in return is violence. And so, and it's not that Jesus is teaching us to try and be doormats or anything like that. And so it's like, if somebody's attacking you, because unfortunately it does happen. We live in a society where people get assaulted. It happens. It's unfortunate and it shouldn't happen, but it does. Um, but when you live a life of violence, you're going to get violence. And so what Jesus is trying to teach us here is that um, if you're going to be if there's going to be violence, you don't be surprised when you get violence back. It's one of the things that, so one of my favorite quotes of all time is from Mike Tyson. When it comes to fighting, he's just like, man, everybody's got to play until you get punched in the face. um, and so it's that same thing. It's like, if you get into, if you get into a fight, don't be surprised when somebody punches you back. But in that same vein, we're not called out to be, we, when you read through scriptures, we are called to be warriors, but not warriors. We're going around killing people. We're going around and actually doing the exact opposite. We're bringing them to life, and not just any life, but the life, the bringing them into the spiritual life that God has intended for them. And so when you look at society, our real, reality, our society, there is a lot of violence out there, and uh, also violence being glorified. And then when you look at superhero society, you know it's like we get really amped up for these superhero movies, or especially for those that read comic books, or like for some of these like really epic storylines where there's a lot of fighting, and there's the universe, it's like, and these grand stories where literally the universe is on the line. And wouldn't this all work out better, like in real, like wouldn't this all work out better if we just actually sat down and talked? And now, obviously, since we live in an imperfect world, words don't always work. But you just think about how often when you see, let's draw the scale back a little bit. Um, and think about, so I'll use Spider-Man as an example. Um, you know, very early on in his career, a lot of Spider-Man's people he would go up against were actually not superpower things. He was actually known as, stopping gang fights and stopping robbers and that sort of stuff. And, you just think about how the superpowered person, just leaps in and punches somebody. Um, and it's very easy to understand, honestly, he wears a mask, that sort of stuff, and he just goes around punching people. Honestly, it actually makes a lot of sense as to why the Daily Bugle and J. Jonah Jameson in particular views him as a villain. He's like, this guy's just going around punching people, and he can do all of these amazing things. This is not good. And obviously, as they flesh out J. Jonah Jameson more in the comics, they found out a little bit more as to why he's not a fan of people in masks. But again, it's, so you bring out, when you're violent towards other people, it's going to bring violence into your life. So it's just something to really consider, that yes, the fights are awesome in My Hero Academia. The fights are awesome in the Marvel universe, when the Avengers are fighting and stuff like that. But we as Christians, we're not necessarily called to fight it physically. We're here to spiritually fight on people's behalves. And so it's just something to consider when it comes to how what we glorify. And even though Shiraki doesn't necessarily believe this, he brings up a good point. He's just like, you guys are deemed heroes, so it means your violence is okay. But we do something and our violence is not okay. And so it's one of the things that one of the things that gets really interesting and gets into some really dynamic storytelling is when the villain truly believes that they're actually the hero of the story. And so Like that's one of the things I like about Lex Luthor as a villain. Lex Luthor believes he's actually the savior for mankind, not Superman. I'll argue, obviously as a Christian, I don't believe either one of them is the savior of mankind. That was Jesus. Um, but Lex Luthor thinks he's the hero. And so he does everything. Now, yes, there are moments that he's doing things specifically to attack Superman, but he attacks Superman or goes after Superman because he thinks relying on Superman is not the path. Um, and so we as society, we can't rely on violence to solve our problems. It's not going, it's really, it's just going to create more violence.
So we think about how, Jesus saved the world and saves the world uh, day in and day out. He didn't do it through violence. He didn't do it through an aggressive act. He, in fact, gave his life as a sacrifice for each one of us. That's the example that we are taught by Christ, not to take up our swords and draw it against someone and fight with that. Instead, what we are called is to uh, offer grace, mercy, and compassion to other people. And so when we are met with um, hate and oppression and evil in any form, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to respond with love, grace, and peace. And so, but this, once again, just as Jeff had said earlier, but this doesn't mean that we're meant to be like doormats or anything. Like, stick up for yourself, but most importantly, stick up for Christ and for His message. And one of my favorite like jokes kind of around the internet is that when people ask me what would Jesus do, that I like to remind them that sometimes flipping tables and chasing people with a whip is within the realm of possibility. And it always makes me chuckle when I see it coming around every now and again. But that's one of those things, like, but he didn't hurt anybody. He disrupted illegal selling, blasphemous selling, those kind of things that were, going against the poor. They were going against God's teaching about idols and things like that. And Jesus was like, this should not happen in the temple. And so he threw those people out. Or he ran the money changers out and things like that. And so what we're supposed to do is, instead of hurting people, instead we are to point them to Christ, or point them to God's teachings, God's laws, and having people follow that, but not doing it with a sword and killing people, because that's bad.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to point out before we get on to the ratings, and Patrick brought this up when he was reading the scripture, is what's happening in the context of this particular verse is there's an aspect of it that I can only imagine there's a little bit of laughter going on, because these are untrained fighters with swords. Peter's a fisherman. He has a sword, which, where did he get the sword all of a sudden? I kind of want to know that. Anyways, and then he goes and chops off one of the and by the way, this is not a soldier's ear that he chopped off. This was a guy carrying the torch. He was the flashlight. He chops this guy's ear off. First of all, that is not a precision move. It's not like he was like, all right, just to intimidate them, I'm going to chop off his ear. No, he's so bad with a sword, he was aiming for the guy's head and trying to take his head off, and he got his ear. And that's it. So yes, I'm sure the Roman soldiers were upset that one of their torchbearers got his ear lobbed off, but there's also, as these guys are trained killers, they know how to kill somebody, and they do it very well. And actually, up until this point in the history of the world, nobody ever did it better than them.
The Roman Empire, if they were good at anything, was killing people and stealing other people's stuff and ideas and making it better.
well, I don't know about making it better, but stealing ideas regardless. But yes, they just like uh that's your big go-to move. You go after our lamp, our torchbearer, and you knock his ear off. Really? You're
Yeah,
ready to die.
yeah. Peter is definitely not Inigo Montoya.
No.
Uh, and this, and but the way you're talking, it reminded me of an episode of Scrubs where JD was trying to look impressive to his girlfriend, and uh he, and I'm going to use the air quotes here that you can't see here in podcast land, like use air quotes, he tries to intimidate a little person, and the girlfriend is like, no, 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 I think it's that guy who's huge. He's like, no, it was definitely that guy, because JP's not exactly a tall person, and that might also have been it. Is like Peter's like, well, maybe I can scare them off if I attack. No, not a soldier. I'll get the torchbearer guy. Yeah, I'll get him, and swings at him. And I was like, if I get him, they'll run off. Because like, but he ends up taking the guy's ear off, which is not. And then Jesus goes and heals the guy's ear, and he's like, oh, okay, well, there goes my power move
Right.
of intimidation.
It's like special attack ear lob.
Yeah, yeah. That's not one to keep Peter. That's a let's workshop that special move there, Peter.
Yeah. So all right, Frack, let's give your ratings for this episode.
All right, so I cannot come up with a reason not to give this episode a 5. It had character moments, it had humor, it had awesome fights. Uh, there's no reason why this can't be considered a perfect episode in the My Hero Academia world. So I'm going to give it a 5.
And for those exact reasons and one more, and just kind of like how we were talking about in the biblical themes, uh, for everything that Patrick just said is why this is and the first truly 5-star episode of My Hero Academia. And not only that, it also brings up social commentary, and where we look at like we look at things through our lens, and so it's like, okay, my actions are justified, but what this person does to me is unjustified and makes them a villain. um so in that same vein, it's like, and so let's take it out, let's take it outside of actual physical violence. Let's take it to a whole nother level. Let's take it to something that, and for those of you that are in the United States, know something that's going on very much right now is that we are extremely politically divided, so much so to the point that if we're on different sides of the quote unquote aisle, everything you say is wrong, and I'm going to oppose it just because you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, or whatever. It could be, or it could be the opposite. It's whatever. um, just because you're on opposite ends of the political spectrum, supposedly on the opposite end. I would argue that most people actually aren't. We have a lot more in common than we care to admit. Um, but and again, it's just like all like so much of this can be unpacked just by this comment by Shigaraki, and saying this is like, just because you guys are quote unquote heroes, your violence is okay. Um,
And
but
that
because I have the label villain, I'm, my violence is not okay. So it's, again, it's just all of these layers that are in this episode, and they're not being heavy-handed with, like, it's like, because I'm a staunch believer when I'm doing something for entertainment, I'm watching or reading, I really don't like a lot of political commentary. I don't mind social commentary, as long as as best as they can, it comes from a neutral position. And in all honesty, what Shigaraki said is very neutral. It's just like, just because you have the label hero, it makes your violence okay, but my violence is wrong because I have the label villain. Now, granted, Shigaraki is truly a villain, and we'll see even more, villainous acts from him as the series progresses. But um, Lex Luthor doesn't believe he's a villain. Or well, the way he's written these days, anyways, he doesn't believe he's the villain. He believes
It
he's
depends on
doing
which
things
Lex
out.
Luthor it is.
This is true. He believes he's doing stuff out for for the good of humanity. But because of the way that the rivalry between Superman and Lex Luthor have been done for 80 years, Lex Luthor is automatically a villain. Um, and so whatever he does must be truly sinister. Um, so it's something, with this episode, there's just so much there, and these little lines that just really, hopefully, what my hope is, and I know I'm talking quite a bit about this. What my hope is that when we start to realize we're not as different as people think, and just because we put so much into these labels out there, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're Christian, atheist, all this sort of stuff, that just because we have these different labels does not mean that we cannot cooperate and learn and live in a society that has some peace, to where we can actually work together, and not be at each other's throats all the time. Or um, I make I make this comment all the time when that with the way that our world works, somebody could legitimately come up with a cure for cancer, but then there'd be people like, well, now cancer doctors don't have a job. Thanks. You're ruining society. It's kind of like he cured cancer. Um, so it's just something for us to really consider, um, with how we view society, I think. And I know that's a really long explanation as to why this is actually a 5-star episode. Um,
Yeah, I mean, there's just too much. There's nothing in here that could be considered a flaw in this episode. The animation was solid. The soundtrack is great. In this episode, I changed up the theme music for our episode. I'm playing the All Might theme, because this is the All Might episode, and then there down the road I'll probably do it again, uh, for a specific episode, but I won't. I won't tell you which one it is, just in case you haven't watched the episodes yet. So you just be prepared for that down the road.
right.
I'll bust out all my theme music again. But anyways, this is something very important for us to do and uh, to discuss. Society, and this made me think of Eric Killmonger from the Black Panther movie, where he made sense, and I mean he was just going to do it the wrong way, but he made sense. He brought about change. It was very nuanced and great, and um, Michael B. Jordan was amazing as Eric Killmonger,
hmm
in that
and
movie.
and granted, and I'll even argue Michael B. Jordan is just actually a phenomenal actor. If you haven't seen the Creed movies, those are phenomenal, um, and largely part of because of him. He's great. He's a very good actor.
Mhm.
But you're right. Killmonger is a great example as well. Just with my Lex Luthor example, Killmonger is a great example where Killmonger thinks he's the hero. Um, Wakanda has all of this to offer, and they're doing nothing about it. And so he's going to change that. Uh, doesn't go about it in the best way, but and in fact, what winds up happening when you finish Black Panther is, not all of the stuff that Killmonger had planned, but some of the stuff that Killmonger had planned, uh, T'Challa winds up doing.
Yeah,
Uh, so
T'Challa just does it the right way.
yes, exactly. He does wind up doing it the right way.
Yeah.
So anyone with any questions for us about biblical lessons? I know we talked about a whole lot of stuff in this particular episode. So much commentary on so many different things. But you have any questions or anything that you would even not necessarily questions, but something that you want to discuss with us, like maybe a point of view that we might have expressed, or even just clarification on things, please contact us. Feel free to reach out to us. Email us at fricketyfracktalkback@gmail.com. Reach out to us on Twitter at fricketyf or at fricketyfrack on Instagram and Facebook. We definitely want to talk with you guys. If you guys have any questions for us about anything that we're doing, or just want to get to know us better, anything, just feel free to reach out to us. All of these links, means of communication, will be listed with the episode, so it'll be very easy for you guys to get in contact with us if there's anything that you would like to discuss with us.
And at the end of the day, know that God loves you, and go plus ultra.